or visit thinassuredguarantee.com.
1K. I'm Adam Bold, founder of the Mutual Fund Store and host of the Mutual Fund Show, heard here Saturdays at 10. As easy as it may be to leave your 401k money where it is, it's worth finding a better option. Because if you're not getting the most out of your hard-earned retirement savings, you might...
Live and local. From Philadelphia's Talk Radio 1210, WPHT. The Michael Smerconish Program.
Jobs, global warming, energy, gun laws, healthcare, the economy, war, taxes, immigration, crime. A lot of issues, not a lot of time. Michael Smerconish.
Hey, it's Michael Smerconish, and you are tuned to the New Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. So, for the third day in a row, but I think for all the right reasons, we're going to get knee-deep again on open carry in the city of Philadelphia, motivated, obviously, by this story that led the Daily News on Monday with a full-page banner cover of a gentleman named Mark Fiorino. He's the 25-year-old who was walking to an AutoZone on Frankfurt Avenue in northeast Philadelphia with a .40 caliber Glock, which he legally owns, holstered in plain view, and then there was an encounter with police, which has become a YouTube sensation. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey spoke to me earlier today about this incident, and I want you to hear what the chief had to say. He was very candid, I thought, in terms of how it was handled by police and what needs to happen going forward. So you will hear Chief Ramsey's perspective momentarily, and Mr. Fiorino is scheduled to be back on the program at 3:30, reacting to what Chief Ramsey has to say in my interview. Let me say something at the outset. Yesterday, during the course of the program, a number of people called and they said, what about the propriety, what about the legality of recording law enforcement without their knowledge? And I said, my instinct tells me that there's no expectation of privacy in a public setting. And we went round and round on this subject. I also consulted George Parry. George was of an opinion that it was unlawful to record law enforcement. The two of us then interacted with one another post-show and both agreed that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has held that since a police officer on duty has no reasonable expectation of privacy, he can be recorded without his knowledge or permission. So let me make it abundantly clear that my reading of the case law, and it's a little convoluted on the subject of traffic stops, but this was not a traffic stop, but it is my opinion that it's clearly established Pennsylvania case law that you can record a police officer on duty, again, stepping out of that traffic stop scenario, because that police officer has no reasonable expectation of privacy and therefore can be recorded without his knowledge or permission, which would explain why the DA's office has not charged Mr. Fiorino with recording law enforcement. As a matter of fact, there is a case that was something I read, not because it was precedential in this regard, it was a federal court case, but because it had a nice summary of the underlying state law, and it was a 2010 case from the Third Circuit, Kelly versus Borough of Carlisle. And here, don't let your eyes glaze over. You'll find this interesting. May 24, 2007, Kelly was riding around in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in a truck driven by his friend Tyler Shop. As was his habit, Kelly brought along a small handheld video camera, which he used to record people for no particular reason. In the course of their meanderings, Shop was pulled over by Officer Rogers for speeding and for violating a bumper height restriction. During the traffic stop, Kelly placed the video camera in his lap and started recording Officer Rogers, allegedly without Rogers' knowledge or consent. Kelly testified that he began recording Rogers, quote, after I saw how he was acting, which conduct allegedly included Rogers yelling at Shop. Shop and Rogers stated otherwise, testifying that Rogers acted professionally at all time. There's no dispute that Kelly was holding the camera in his lap during the encounter, although the parties disagreed as to whether the camera was hidden. Rogers contends the camera was hidden by Kelly's hands. Kelly claims it was in plain sight. So the Third Circuit now has to take a look at what went on in this case and whether whether it was appropriate or lawful for such a recording or whether it violated the wiretap law. And then further along in the discussion on this case, they talk about the Pennsylvania law. In Agnew versus Doppler, that was a 1998 Pennsylvania Supreme Court case, 2 police officers claimed their police chief violated the Wiretap Act when he used an intercom to eavesdrop on squadron conversations. The court held the chief did not violate the Wiretap Act because the officers did not have a reasonable expectation of privacy in statements made in the squad room, and one cannot have an expectation of non-interception absent a finding of a reasonable expectation of privacy. Since Agnew, said the federal court, numerous state and federal courts have applied the expectation of privacy requirement in cases alleging a violation of Pennsylvania's Wiretap Act. And here's the critical line. Even more significantly, almost 10 years before Agnew, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court held that secretly recording a police officer in the performance of his duties did not violate the Wiretap Act. It's a case called Henlon. In Henlon, a theft suspect who covertly recorded a state trooper's interrogation did not violate the Wiretap Act because the trooper did not have a reasonable expectation of privacy. It goes on to say that there's a little bit more confusion when there is a traffic stop case, as was the one in the federal opinion that I was reading about. The Fiorino case was not a traffic stop case. Bottom line, my interpretation of the Fiorino facts suggests that the man did not break the law when he was recording law enforcement without their knowledge, at least initially without their knowledge. Okay? So there you go. Little legal brief to begin the program. Now I want you to hear my conversation with Philadelphia's Police Chief, Commissioner Charles Ramsey, about this incident. We had a conversation earlier this morning. Hey, thank you so much for being a guest on my program and shedding some light on this. As you may imagine, Commissioner, this is a hot topic on talk radio. People are really buzzing about this February incident with a gentleman named Mark Fiorino. I'd like to hear whatever it is the Philadelphia Police Chief wants the public to know about the incident.
Well, let me start by saying that there was a lack of clarity on the part of members of my department as it relates to this whole notion of open carry. The way the law is written, it specifically mentions concealed carry. There is a loophole, if you will, or at least an interpretation by courts that this also includes open carry. Unfortunately, many of our officers weren't aware of that. We've corrected that. We've put a lot of messages out. We've done video for roll call to make sure that people understand that there is a right to carry openly. However, a person still has to be licensed. And that's going to really be the source of some issues, I think, as time goes on.
Well, what kind of a predicament does that then present for law enforcement? Because if there is a right to carry, but one must be licensed, on visual sight, you see a guy walking down the street, you see that he has a weapon on his person. What then is the appropriate response from law enforcement, if any?
Well, they have the ability to stop the individual to determine whether or not the person is legally carrying the gun. Now, Philadelphia is a city of the first class, and we are the only city of the first class in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we do have the right to stop and find out whether or not a person is in fact licensed. However, the person is also armed. You don't know just on sight whether or not an individual is licensed, unlicensed. Unfortunately, in the world we live in now, there have been numerous incidents of people walking into businesses and opening fire. School campuses have been impacted by this. We recently had a congresswoman shot and seriously wounded. So you don't really know who you're coming up against. So that's going to be a tense situation in many instances, and we just have to really reinforce through our training so officers handle it properly.
Is your advice to the department to stop each person that you see in an open carry posture or to make a judgment on the street depending on other circumstances?
I would think that if they don't know the person to be a police officer, that they should stop and they should challenge to make sure that that person is in fact licensed. You can't just look at a person and tell whether or not they're legitimate. You just can't do that. And we live in a world now where we have to be careful, but it's the way in which we approach people and the way we talk to them. Certainly it was inappropriate to refer to the person as junior, and the liberal use of the F word certainly was inappropriate. So it's the way in which you approach a person to find out whether or not they're legally licensed to carry. And I think that's probably the bigger issue here.
All right, let me ask you another difficult circumstance for law enforcement. Do they draw a weapon or leave their weapon holstered at a time when they are trying to learn whether this is an individual who's properly licensed?
Drawing a weapon is perfectly permissible. I mean, you have to protect yourself until you find out exactly what it is you have. In some circumstances, and remember, these laws will apply throughout the city. There are some areas of our city that we have a lot of violent crime that takes place, and officer safety is really in the front of their minds all the time because of what's going on in many of these areas. So I don't have a problem with an officer drawing a weapon from the holster, whether you point it at an individual, and if that's necessary, is another issue. Again, these are all circumstances that, depending on what's going on at the moment, the officer's going to have to exercise judgment. And that's what I mean when I say it's going to be a tense situation, because until you know who it is you're dealing with, you've got an armed person who may or may not be intending to do something wrong.
Commissioner, in light of your look at this matter, is it fair to say that, as far as you know, Mr. Fiorino in that incident back in February was not running afoul of or violating any of the city or state's gun laws?
Well, the DA did charge him with a couple charges. I don't recall offhand what the charges were. I think reckless conduct and disorderly were the charges.
Right, but not gun violations.
Not gun violations, because he was licensed. Now, we also have reciprocity with 26 different states. So a person could actually be from another jurisdiction and have a license. So now if it's 3 in the morning, how do you check to find out whether or not that's a legitimate license? I mean, this is a little more complicated than some people are looking at it. So we've got to be able to put something in place, and we will put something in place, to protect the rights of the individuals that have a right to carry firearms, but at the same time make sure our officers are safe and the general public are safe. And we need to really think this stuff through. I don't know if we want to have people openly carrying guns on school campuses. And I think if someone walked into the radio station where you're located with a gun, you don't know if that person is upset because of a broadcast you just made, or a discussion you just had on air, or if the person is there legitimately just to take care of business. I mean, it puts people in an uneasy position, and I think we all need to stop and take a deep breath and think about when it's appropriate to do that.
And once we've taken that breath and made some decisions, I would expect you'd have to undertake some kind of an education campaign with law enforcement.
Yeah, there's no question about that, and that's what we're doing. We're actually doing that now. We've had extensive roll call training. We've produced a video that's going to be shown at roll calls on a continual basis, at least 3 times a month, to make sure that officers are aware. But at the same time, I don't want to sacrifice their safety by having them just approach an individual who we know is armed with your hands in your pocket, and then you turn out that this guy is, upset about something and willing to do harm. That 60 Minutes program over the weekend, I saw that some group that believes it's okay to shoot politicians and police officers if they don't agree with them. I mean, we've got some people who have extreme views in this world, unfortunately. And but I think that we need to treat people in a respectful way. And that was one of the major problems we had with that particular contact, was the way in which it was handled.
Hey, Chief, final question on a related issue, and this, too, has drawn a lot of interest. The subject of whether it's permissible to record a member of law enforcement. I took a look at the case law just last night and saw that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has held that since a police officer on duty has no reasonable expectation of privacy, he can be recorded without his knowledge or permission.
Well, I think if we conduct ourselves appropriately, it doesn't matter if we're recorded or not. Obviously, this is a situation now where everybody's got a video camera of some kind of recording device. We see it time and time again when police actions are captured on video, and in many cases they're inappropriate actions. So we make our officers aware of that. You have to conduct yourself professionally at all times. One of the problems I saw with this particular case, when listening to your program actually a couple days ago when you had him on, or yesterday when you had him on, he was actually had the recorder on prior to the conduct, which means he was actually recording the voices of ordinary citizens as well. And that creates some issues. But again, I'm not a legal scholar, so I'll leave that up to them to decide what's right and wrong as it relates to that.
Hey, Chief Ramsey, thank you for allowing me to intrude on your day. I appreciate it when you're on my program.
No, thanks a lot. I really enjoy talking to you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So there you go. That's Chief Ramsey talking about this case that has captivated us for a couple of days. Chief Ramsey making the point that the law references concealed, but the case law talks about open carry as well. Hence some confusion in the minds of even members of law enforcement. There is a right to carry, but you've got to be licensed.